let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the rapidly escalating geopolitical maneuvers and the massive economic stakes in the Strait of Hormuz, and we're sticking strictly to the facts. This narrow stretch of water is arguably the absolute most critical geopolitical choke point on the planet, and recent events have basically turned it into a high-stakes chessboard. So we're going to bypass all the background noise and look directly at the immediate problem, the shifting economic policies, and the wildly differing perspectives of the key players involved.
Here is our visual roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The naval blockade resuming. 2. Who pays for safe passage. 3. The push for regime change. 4. Iran's counteroffer. And 5. The global energy stakes. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The naval blockade resumes. So, the immediate catalyst for all this tension is literally a ticking clock. Back in mid-June, a memorandum of understanding opened up this brief window of sanctions waivers. The whole idea was to give negotiations a fighting chance. And actually, right up until yesterday, several Iran-linked vessels, we're talking container ships, product tankers, they successfully transited the strait. But man, that diplomatic window slammed shut fast. According to a source, the U.S. administration stated they were really close to an agreement, but talks completely collapsed after commercial vessels were fired upon. Because they shot first, which is the U.S. perspective here, a strict naval blockade officially resumes today at exactly 4 p.m.
82.5 million. That is the estimated number of barrels of Iranian crude oil that transited the strait during that brief open window since mid-June. Think about that volume for a second. The U.S. administration deliberately allowed this immense flow to happen as an opening for a potential deal. But with the blockade snapping right back into place, this tap is abruptly shut off, which fundamentally alters the region's economic reality overnight. And as a quick aside, for logistics and supply chain startups out there, this is exactly the kind of wild volatility they model for, tracking these sudden closures so they can reroute global shipping algorithms at a moment's notice.
At the exact same time, diplomatic maneuvering is happening on multiple fronts. As the blockade goes into effect, President Trump held a private lunch with the new Iraqi Prime Minister. The explicit purpose here? To further isolate Iran from the rest of the Middle East. That meeting focused on two highly specific strategic goals. First, planning the disarmament of Iran-linked militia groups currently operating within Iraq, and second, maintaining enough stability to keep U.S. forces on a really strict timetable to withdraw from the region by September 30th.
Moving on to Section 2. Who pays for safe passage?
Well, guarding these waters is incredibly expensive, and that's leading to a massive strategic pivot. Initially, an idea was floated where the U.S. would essentially act like a maritime toll booth, charging a 20% reimbursement fee on ships navigating the strait just to cover the military protection costs. But the U.S. administration ultimately scrapped that concept. They noted they didn't fully agree with charging a fee for freedom of navigation. So instead, after what were described as highly productive conversations with leaders from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, the U.S. is replacing that fee idea with massive trade and investment deals from these Gulf states. The core argument is that these nations have the financial wherewithal to fund regional security efforts themselves, rather than relying solely on American taxpayers.
Which brings us to Section 3, the push for regime change.
Inside Washington, the political rhetoric is really heating up, and we're seeing intense pressure from within the U.S. legislature. Some representatives are arguing that standard negotiations are entirely in vain. As they see it, the Iranian regime is negotiating in bad faith and just won't stop until their capabilities are neutralized. Because of this, their proposed strategy is absolute: degrade Iran's military capability to zero. They specifically point to the success of previous blockades but argue that this time it has to be paired with kinetic action, like actually destroying the specific launch pads used to send drones after those oil tankers. Furthermore, some lawmakers explicitly stated that the ultimate goal here must be regime change, pushing to replace the current religious leadership with a military leader they believe they can actually do business with. To capture just how intense this perspective is, we have to look at the exact rhetoric echoing around Capitol Hill. Lawmakers are framing this situation in the harshest possible terms. By comparing Iranian operations to the mafia and outright extortion, they're building a moral and legal case for uncompromising military force. In their view, these attacks on commercial shipping aren't just geopolitical posturing, they are literal demands for protection money, which makes any sort of diplomatic compromise completely impossible in their eyes.
Now, let's look at Section 4, Iran's counteroffer.
But hey, diplomacy is a two-way street, right? When that initial U.S. idea of a 20% protection fee was floating around, the Iranian foreign minister issued a highly pointed response. He claimed that whoever provides safe passage should indeed be compensated, but he insisted that Iran, not the U.S., has always been the guardian of the strait. Poking fun at that abandoned U.S. toll idea, he added, 20% is too much. We will be fair.
It is a very calculated rhetorical flip, directly turning the U.S. narrative on its head to assert undeniable Iranian sovereignty over the waterway, regardless of any Western blockades.
Finally, Section 5. The global energy stakes.
So, why does this specific stretch of water dictate so much international policy? It comes down to the extreme disparity in regional reliance on this energy. Check this out. The United States relies on a mere 1 to 2% of this oil for its national supply. Meanwhile, Europe relies on this exact same choke point for a massive 50% of its energy, with the rest of the world taking the remaining 48%. For U.S. policymakers, this huge disparity is the smoking gun for why cost-sharing is necessary. And out in the private sector, while energy tech startups are taking this exact macro-level data and using it to build highly predictive pricing models, which helps their European clients hedge against these localized, yet massive geopolitical risks.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about this. We've seen the naval blockade snap back, the demands for massive Gulf investments, the really intense calls for regime change, and the stark realities of who actually relies on this global oil. The dynamics in the Strait of Hormuz are shifting rapidly. So, if the United States follows through on its push to stop bearing the financial and military burden of global maritime security all by itself, who steps into that void? Are regional powers going to step up? Or will the world's most vital waterways become increasingly contested and chaotic? It's a massive question, and how it gets answered will define international trade and global energy security for decades to come. Thanks for diving into the facts with me today. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next one.